Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer. Sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Matt Donato, co-creator and editor of Certified Forgotten. You've also seen and read his work in places such as Bloody Disgusting, Fangoria, Ebert Voices, Slash Film, and What to Watch.
Just everywhere.
Everywhere, whatever. Welcome to the show!
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate the invitation back now that we have had both y'all on Certified Forgotten.
Hell yeah. And now we've had both of y'all on Scarred for Life. It's one big happy family.
The podcast community is always giving.
Exactly. Okay, so let's take it back to the start. How did you get introduced to horror?
So my introduction to horror came a lot later than most people. Mm-hmm. And I raised that because in listening to podcasts and listening to other horror critics talk about how they got started, I realized how unique my path is in a way. And that is basically the sense that I avoided horror for a very long time in my life. I avoided horror growing up until basically high school and like to the tail end of high school. And that was because I grew up in a house where my father was a detective. My mom was a teacher. They were both, pillars in the community in a way. And it was very much an environment that bred following the rules and doing things the right way. And horror was just something neither of them had an interest in. So immediately it was just this weird genre that was not to be understood. So that rubbed off on me 100%. It completely rubbed off on me because I'm around my parents all the time. I'm an only child as well, so no siblings to sneak movies after midnight. I was at the mercy of a PG-13 movie requires to be 13. An R-rated movie requires to be 17. We will not be watching those in my house. That's my mom's rules, obviously. So, long story short, that was my upbringing, and to the point where I was a very anxious kid. I had a lot of fears and paranoias. When I was little, my mom told me, and I even remember, I used to have this weird thing in my head that I was always going to throw up. And no matter where I was in public, I would just be like, Mom, am I going to throw up? And that was my anxiety to a point for a very long time in my life. So horror fit the mold of a thing I avoided for a very long time because it would just scare me. And it was just bad for me. Cut forward to high school, and I will tie this into the fact that my girlfriend at the time was like, we're going to break you out of your comfort zone, which was basically a giant bubble suit for me. That was my comfort zone. So we went to Six Flags in Jersey, and I had never been on a roller coaster too. And that ties into fears as well. I would never do a roller coaster because I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of fast things. Excitement was scary in a way to me. So she forced me on every single roller coaster. I went home extremely happy. I felt adrenaline rush kind of for the first time.
Okay.
And that 100% spiked my interest to be like, what else have I been avoiding my entire life and scared of prematurely and in my head without experiencing? And horror was the second thing. So I went right back to the Child's Play movies, which if they were not covered extensively, I totally understand. Bride of Chucky would be my actual Scarred for Life. I had a very bad time with Chucky for a very long time in my life. So I conquered Chucky as my first re-entry into the world as someone who wanted to appreciate horror and appreciate these things that, yes, are scary, but also can add such meaning to life. And that is just a very broad way of saying it. And there's a lot deeper conversation there, but there's a lot to talk about in horror. There's a lot to talk about what horror can help people who are anxious, help them kind of come out of their shell. So that was high school for me. That was the end of high school. I finally found friends who wanted to show me horror movies, and the rest is this fucking mess in front of you.
So you hadn't really got into horror until the end of high school, you said, but had you ever seen a horror movie or caught one? Was there a first horror movie that stands out besides the Child's Play films?
So not really.
Okay.
I will honestly say, hearing other people talk, as I said before we started recording, I listened to Jessica Scott's episode, and to hear people like Jessica who watched Poltergeist at such a young age, I had none of that. Okay. I can remember being at a friend's house and watching, I honestly forget which Freddy movie it was, but I was far too young for that, and I saw a Freddy movie at too young an age, and that was all of 5 seconds being like, fuck off, I'm out. Nope, no shot. I was at a sleepover once, and this goes back to Bride of Chucky, and literally had to turn away from the TV because they were watching it, and I just pretended I was doing something else, but I just wouldn't watch it because I started hyperventilating. So that was me in horror for a very long time in my life, and that is why I so adamantly, do y'all have Party Cities by you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Halloween Party City, my mom would go in for Halloween decorations. I would not walk down the mask aisle because that was too scary for me. This is me. I'm prepping everyone as to why I picked Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, because you're all probably sitting there going it's a musical comedy. Yeah, we're going to get there.
I'm so excited. So you went to the Child's Play movies when you got into horror. What were some of the other first films that you kind of watched to get yourself into the horror genre?
So comedy helped me in a lot. The horror comedies became my go-to in the sense that anything that had a fun vibe to it, anything that was a midnighter, and maybe that's why I adore them so much, I really just latched onto that. And I will say the one movie, and we'll fast forward even to college. I think college is when I became the full horror appreciator I am today. And my movie was REC, R-E-C, however you want to pronounce it. That was the one movie that Netflix was still giving you DVDs in the mail.
Oh my God.
They didn't even have streaming. And one of the first ones I got, because I had a list of reading Bloody Disgusting every day. You just find out these movies you want to watch that you can't find anywhere. And,
yep.
REC comes on Netflix, and I'm like, well, I wanted to see this so much. I love found footage. I love everything about this. We're going to do this. And that was the first time I watched a horror movie. And it wasn't just entertainment. It wasn't just for the thrill. I sat there and appreciated the medium itself and appreciated everything about that movie, from the camera work to what found footage could do. My mind kind of blew up in that moment. So I think REC is really the first movie that threw me into the throes of horror and became my go-to for any time someone's like, well, what was the movie that kind of turned the edge on that? And I'm like, REC is that. But the Child's Play were the ones that were my conquering my fear. This is it. And they are my favorite slasher franchise to date.
You have some sick Child's Play shoes from Andrew Lucene.
From Mr. Andrew Lucene. Did him up right. My Bride of Chucky's.
What a great movie though to have that sort of the synapses start to fire with REC, because that, we talked about that on the podcast, and it's such a fucking intense movie.
Oh, it's so good.
I love that, because I was thinking back to what was the movie for me that did that, and it would have been Nightmare on Elm Street would have been for me, whereas you start to see things as the art behind it, and you see that it's not just a series of things that happen, and I love that. What a great turning point.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people's stories start so young, so they've had time to go through the backlog. They've had time to see all the big franchises. That big brother or sister says, listen, we're going to start you with the Freddy, we're going to start you with the Jason, because you need to know where horror kind of built itself. For me, coming into it so late, I didn't have time to go backwards. I'm still not as learned, I would say, in the true classics. I'm still going through Hammer horror. I'm still going through the black and white stuff, because I just never had that time to do it. And when I started to get into horror is when I started to get into writing as well. So I just hit the ground running with new age horror, and 2010, 2009, everything since then I've seen. Like, that's the thing. I have done very well with staying up with like modern horror, and that is exactly what I've dedicated myself to. And the cracks, you know, stuff falls through every now and then, but I'm able to go through the backlog when I can. It's a fun thing, but we all do it. We all basically pick projects so we can write about things, and most of that stuff is modern to keep up with SEO, but every once in a while you get that chance to write about something old and you're like, I could finally clean that blind spot up. So that has been the biggest challenge for me. That's why Wreck is my movie. Wreck is my movie because it just happened with me. It happened at the same time. And I just never really had that chance to go backwards first. And obviously Child's Play is an outlier there. But, you know, I didn't see every Friday the 13th movie until the pandemic when I bought the box set.
I saw all the Friday the 13th, not the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street movies that way too. I have a very similar story. Like, I got into horror. Like, I liked it for a long time, but I didn't really get into it until I was like in high school. And I have a lot of blind spots and things that fall through the cracks too. And it's good to remember that and know that you don't have to know I feel like sometimes there's this pressure to have this encyclopedic knowledge of all horror forever. And I'm like, I've seen nothing when actually
you're not a real horror fan unless you've seen X movie
like,
from like the 70s that no one else has seen.
I have no time. Yeah, it's just nice to hear talk about that and be like, it's okay. Not everyone has like every era of horror memorized and like devoted to their memory.
Yeah, because every story is different. You know, we all find our ways to horror in such different ways, and I am so appreciative of the people that did have that upbringing in the movie stores and going to video rental stores, and their parents were okay with that stuff. And unfortunately, like, I didn't have that upbringing, so for me, I had to find my own way in, and it took a lot longer. Yeah. But that doesn't, make anyone any less of a fan. I think the unfortunate thing with like online toxicity is it becomes a contest. It's like, you're not a real horror fan. I know way more about you. I've seen more than you. But it's not about what you've seen. It's what you bring and what enthusiasm you have for the genre, and that can't be faked. That can't be replicated. So I do my best to shoo away those people. Like when I wrote about Friday the 13th for Bloody on the remake, it's like, oh, well, you think the remake's one of the best entries in the franchise, so obviously you're not a fan. And
but
I'm
it
like,
also
well, fuck you, number
is.
one.
But also
number two.
But also, like, you're not wrong.
Yeah. Oh no, I know I'm not wrong. But that's the thing.
No, like, I
that's
know
the thing.
I'm correct.
We fall into that, and we fall into the comments online, and it eats away at us, and at least me, I can't shake it off all the time, but
yeah,
it is, as you said, Envy, like, literally, it's good to know that other people have that same story, because, the pedigree all y'all have, and, to hear that, yes, you haven't seen everything, like, it's okay. It's okay.
So I know that you didn't watch horror movies as a kid, but I am curious, as an adult, what draws you now to this genre?
It is... Number one is just the feeling that I get from watching a horror movie. I can't shake off that adrenaline, and I still get scared by them. That's the fun part. Like, it's a good horror movie because I've covered so goddamn many that, yeah, I am desensitized to some things. But when something scares me, that's something special. And that fun factor of finding that hidden gem, that's what brings me back. And also, again, as a child, we want to talk about anxiety. I was that kid that like laid awake at night for an hour and thought about death, because it's like, death is scary. What is death? What happens when I die? And I don't do that anymore, thanks to horror. And that's weird to say, but I'm comfortable in the fact that there is finality and that horror has made that normal. So I growing up in a household where my mom definitely had anxiety. My mom definitely had her own, she'll say it herself. So that's not me like outing anything, but I inherited some of that. So I inherited it in a way that drove me to horror, and that has helped me deal with some of my hang-ups for a while.
Yeah. I always think, and I brought this quote up a couple times while we're recording, but I always think about Wes Craven, where he said that horror is like the boot camp for the psyche. And it's true. It helps people that have like anxiety and that kind of thing. It's absolutely does.
The world is a dark place, and horror is the only genre that really wants to deal with that. So if anything, it just helps you for reality.
Hell yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you said that you still get scared sometimes watching movies as an adult, even though, we're all kind of desensitized. What was the last film that truly scared you?
Ooh, the last film that truly scared me. I had really visceral reactions to Crawl. That one was up there for me. The way that the creature effects and the creature scares specifically were worked in, absolutely just fierce, nerve shredding. The first time the reptile just burst through the stairwell, I did not see it coming, and I jumped into theater. So I think Crawl had a really good effect on me. Like, of course, I'm like blanking a little bit, but I'm doing the Scariest Scene Ever Now with Ariel Fisher on Slash Film.
Yeah.
And just me going through things, I'm finding so many great scares that I'd forgotten about a little bit. But, you know, this week we wrote about the Banshee chapter. And once again, like, Banshee chapter is effing horrifying. It blends found footage in a way that is so cool and it's Lovecraftian. So Banshee chapter for me is, I think it was like 2013, so maybe not recent. But that's the stuff that truly scares me. And honestly, found footage. Found footage is the one thing that will continue to scare me. And obviously I see MV dancing because this is your genre.
It's my genre.
Trust me, I've been a found footage fan since, Bloody Disgusting released. Sorry, not to...
No.
I didn't mean to over...
You're good.
But I was going to say, Bloody Disgusting released this thing called Atrocious when they started Bloody Disgusting as Selects. So, you know, we're talking like 2012 or something like that. And I realized what indie found footage could do. And Paranormal Activity, obviously, it is the king for me. It still is effective. It still works. And I will be one of the people who defends that movie to death. Cloverfield, a monster movie that's found footage. It's all about that perspective. So you show me a found footage movie, I'm probably going to throw a scare at you that still is in my mind.
Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. That's it. We don't have to talk about anything else. It's done. That's the interview.
We hit on found footage. We're done.
We're
Podcast
done.
over. We're out.
Listeners, take a drink.
So you talked about like what scared you, but I know you have a reputation for liking certain kinds of films on film.
By all means.
But like, what do you really love? Like, what are your favorite horror movies? I know people know you for liking Dude Bro Party Massacre.
Dude Bro Party Massacre. Great. Come on, the best one of the Dude Bro.
Dude Bro Slumber Party.
Dude Bro Slumber Party Massacre 17. Yeah. That is my favorite movie. No, that's a loaded question because I do gravitate towards comedy, as we talked about. Like, horror comedies are my genre. Found footage is also my genre. So I get this weird smattering of favorite films that just get stuck in between. But if we're really going favorite of all time, I can't get away from Bride of Chucky. I can't get away from The Return of the Living Dead.
Fuck yeah.
I flip-flop on so many others, but like, I don't ironically love Demon Wind. I effing love Demon Wind. So like, I don't know if it really would be top 10, but it's up there. In recent memory, Satan's Slaves made a really hard play to be in like my top 10, top 5. And everything else just keeps switching out. But I think the constants that are always there is Return. The constant that's always there is Bride of Chucky. And from there, it becomes a toss-up. But there is so much good horror that I could just cycle through. It's impossible.
Yep.
So you said earlier, kind of switching to the kind of creative stuff, you said earlier that you found horror movies about the same time you were writing about movies. How did you decide to write about film? Or was it something you always wanted?
Accidentally.
Okay.
No, I'm a business major. I went to college to get a business degree in business management, and it is a soul-sucking life that I needed something else to balance out with. So I'm still a day job person. Me and Monagle call ourselves day job critics, and as most of us are, I assume. But, you know, balancing the 9 to 5, I needed that something else creative in my life. My girlfriend in college had these like diaries where she would write about books. And basically there were these diaries that you could be your own book critic, but just like for yourself, and you would journal them. And she accidentally got a film one time. So it was like made out to be a film, baby's first film criticism journal. And she's like, do you want it? I had no intention of ever writing. My high school honors English teacher told me I didn't belong in honors and I shouldn't pursue anything in writing. And he was also the film studies teacher, so that was one of my first feedback.
Have you ever sent him a link?
Absolutely not.
I
don't even know. Dude doesn't even have. He like lived in the Catskills and was just like a hippie poet. And definitely didn't.
I don't give a shit. Okay.
Could not even get that. No. So she gave me the diary, and I was kind of just like messing around with it, going, "All right, this is kind of fun. I'm recording what I'm watching. I'm recording what I'm doing. Maybe this could be a thing." So, as anyone who's done what we do, I started a blog. I just started writing about it and getting better and like working on my craft. And after a while, I stumbled upon. Listen, I got my start at We Got This Covered. I know it's a dumpster fire now, and I don't associate with them, but we all get our start somewhere. And honestly, getting my start there worked out for me tremendously. And I have since moved on to way better things, but I went to steal an image from them and saw a Write For Us section, and I just applied. They accepted me, and I became kind of like Yeah. Oh, straight up. Yeah. I applied. They took me in as their critic, and I started doing, like, I moved to New York and I started doing press days, and I started doing all the screenings there. So it was really just diving into the deep end and working my ass off to get better and better at this until I was at a point where I actually felt comfortable to do it, quote unquote, professionally, whatever we want to call it. And the creativity was everything that I needed. So I threw myself to it. I just have latched onto it, and it's been so helpful throughout everything that I do, honestly, because if I was just working my day job, I don't know how things would have gone by now.
Yeah, I completely relate to that because my day job is completely uncreative and, pays the bills, does all that kind of stuff. But it's like, I need that creative side, so I completely relate to that 100%.
Shout out to that college girlfriend for giving you the job.
Yeah.
On it straight up, like, still talk to her, great, everything's good, and I say that. I'm like, literally, I don't know if this ever would have happened if I didn't have that weird introduction.
Weird.
That's amazing, though.
I love stories like that, though. You're like, this is a fucking random thing that happened, but here, now I'm a fucking film critic because I'll be like, maybe just because this person gave me a journal. It's cool. I know, it's just cool.
I was gonna say, who could champion Demon Wind? Like, who would be out here championing Demon Wind if I didn't get that?
Out here championing Demon Wind at every point possible. Exactly. This is important.
I mean, it's a fine movie.
Go slam my laptop shut. End the podcast.
I still have to see it, but I bought it because of you. Like, I own it because of you. So
just have some drinks, maybe take an edible,
It's
and just
fun.
have yourself a night.
It's fun.
It's so much
really
fun.
yeah,
is.
that sounds great. That sounds like my plan for watching it anyway. So it sounds incredible. But okay, can you tell us a little bit about your site, Certified Forgotten, and podcast?
Yeah, we want to hear the real story
Yeah.
after talking with Monocle.
That's right, because I'm sure you've asked Monocle the same question.
Oh yeah,
We did.
Oh yeah,
We want to hear
exactly.
your
Okay.
story.
I want to see how wrong it is, and just like I'm gonna butcher it. So it was all my idea, obviously. He had no input at all. No, so the story I think that will align on this is Monocle and I have talked about working together on a project for a little bit at that point. We were trying to figure out the right podcast. So the podcast came first. The podcast we were drawn to because we both attended the same little indie horror festival in New York City, and we didn't know about it until we actually talked years later. So we're just talking about some of the films that we saw there and we adored. And I'm sure you guys have the same experience where we're all at these little festivals and we see these beautiful little indies that never get the distribution they deserve, never get the marketing, never get anything. So no one hears about them. And that was the simple starting point for Certified Forgotten, because we're like, okay, we need a podcast idea. We want to work together. What if we find a way to shine a light on these movies that Rotten Tomatoes has forgotten? And by extension, like the horror community in a way. And luckily we found out that the horror community themselves have not forgotten about these movies, but the mainstream has in a majority, like overwhelmingly. So that was the start for the podcast. And then the website was birthed from the fact that, listen, like, we're both fortunate in our situations, me and Monocle, like, we both have the financial stability to sit here and say, okay, let's start a website. Let's start paying writers that we want to see write pieces that we want to read. And let's try to just spread the wealth a little bit, because there is a way to pitch certain sites. There's certain pitches that are always going to get accepted. And what we have steered towards is staying in line with our web podcast. Sorry. So the website, we do want to focus on horror films that are generally forgotten from the 2000 plus era. Mm-hmm. So that is what we try to do, but we have opened it up further. Rob Hunter wrote about Mr. Frost, so we're getting into the 90s and things of that nature. But what we've always wanted to do is just make sure that we are finding a way to give younger writers the opportunity to start somewhere, the opportunity to learn how to pitch, maybe learn how to do things for those bigger sites, and to just make sure we're giving voices the due credit they deserve, if whether or not they're getting published elsewhere. Like, we're not saying we're the only people publishing certain voices. We're not saying we're the only people doing what we're doing, but we are saying that we are another place that's putting a lot of thought into a site that is trying to come out there and just give people a different kind of criticism, a different kind of outlet. So that's what we banked on. That's what we've always going to try to do. And, things like Ren's piece on Seed of Chucky, that's exactly what our site is all about. Like, we want to give a story like that the platform and also pay them to do it, because that's going to go on a blog somewhere, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we have a way to get that out there, and we have a way to put it in front of Don and say, hey, you should give this a read, like, that's what we're going to do.
Oh, he posted it. It was so exciting.
That's awesome.
Donnett's a very nice man.
He is.
Don
He's
is
wonderful.
a very nice man.
Did that align with what Monagle said?
It did.
It did, actually.
It did.
Okay.
Very nice.
So what is it like working with Monagle? Give us the tea.
Oh, he's so miserable.
SEO this and SEO that.
He is legitimately the opposite of me, which actually does very much work in this sense. He is the intellectual, knowledgeable one, and that's not saying I'm not. I'm just the more colorful one. We just both have different writing styles. We have different approaches to things, but that makes for the best partnership because we're able to see both sides of the coin, and I can get my perspective on a piece. He can give his perspective. And when we meet in the middle, that's when the piece is, 100% shine. So it has been a pleasure. Do we butt heads sometimes? Of course. Like, it's going to happen in any partnership. Like, you're going to do any little bit of that stuff. But it has been so nice to kind of find all the ways that we can work together and all the ways we can learn from each other. The SEO is actually a great thing because our first piece that we ever published was Lindsay Travis's piece on the Friday the 13th lawsuit. And it is number 1 or number 2 ranked on Google because of what Monagle does. Monagle knew, he's like, this piece is not only going to do well for us, we're going to take over this on Google. It's going to drive our website. So the fact that he is able to look at things and find those keywords and, and be your column for us, like literally the stuff not your column, but the stuff you're doing for us, that's technically SEO work.
Yep.
That's that big nasty word of like, that's an SEO piece. But guess what? It's also incredibly genius writing and it's very original. And these are ideas that aren't being written about. So we found a way, I think, and work with Monagle. He's shown me 100% that you can do the SEO content and it can be creative and engaging and new. So I'm getting sick and tired of hearing how SEO is the death knell of journalism because it's not. Bad SEO writing is the death knell of journalism.
Correct. I will die on that hill as well.
If you can pitch SEO well, you are an invaluable writer. I want people to understand this. Like, you can pitch your personal pieces. I get that. You could do all that stuff. But if you know how to work SEO and do it right, I promise you will get accepted many places. I want people to hear that.
Awesome. So this was a question we asked Monagle as well. What is your favorite episode that you've recorded?
Oh, so this is hard because 3 come to mind immediately. I want to say it was the one with Tyler McIntyre because Monagle is not a horror comedy fan. This is where we differ tremendously. We butt heads all the time. If it's a horror comedy, it's a Donato movie. The only time we've ever come together on one, which is so weird, was Deep Murder, Trace's episode. For some reason, he loved that, and I don't get why, because it doesn't fit the Monagle rules for liking a movie. So in any case, that was a bonkers one. But I go to Tyler because we did an episode with Amelia on Patchwork. And I dug Patrick a lot. Amelia did as well. And Monagle was just like on there going like, listen, comedies aren't for me. Tyler, great job. But like, whatever. So like Tyler comes on to do an episode with us and he brings this great Brazilian mixture of like Candyman and a haunted house film. It's awesome. And of course, it's kind of, we get into conversations of like, all right, Tyler, I'm sorry I said those things about Pat. Like, it just comes out naturally, like Monagle just eating shit on that episode. So, 100%, that was one of my other ones. Also, I will plug Ted Gagan's episode on Zombie Ass Toil of the Dead, because Monagle hated that movie so much, and you could just hear it. You could hear it as he's talking about it. It's one of my favorite episodes because we're able to have a really in-depth conversation about exploitation and what it means, and also talk about a Japanese extreme horror movie about ass zombies. And Monagle's just hating every minute of it, and I'm loving every minute of it. So, how could I let those 2 episodes not be my favorite?
That's amazing.
That's fucking incredible. What was the name of the movie
Zombie Ass Toil of the Dead.
again? Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it's wild.
neat.
There's like tentacle monsters that come out of zombie butts,
Oh,
All right.
wow.
and that's like a mild spoiler.
Wow.
Well, on that note,
Speaking of zombie butts and tentacles.
yeah. Donato, what movie did you bring with you today?
Something a little more family friendly. Well, I don't even know if it's family friendly anymore.
Oh boy.
Considering some of the dated references we'll say in there, I brought Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And do you want me to get in why yet? What do you want me to do here?
So let me read the plot synopsis, which is like very short, and then we will talk about why. But the plot synopsis, short and sweet. A group of scientists band together to save the world from mutated killer tomatoes.
That was from IMDb, and that is As we're discovering
Bang
whenever
on.
we do these, it's like the tip of the iceberg of what these movies are
But
actually
also, like,
about.
that is how I feel like you should describe it, because there's no real other way to, like, encapsulate what this movie is.
I mean,
really, at all. So, okay, this movie's ridiculous, so I need to know why you chose this movie. Donato, please tell us your horror story about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Gladly. I will say that I chose this because I really wanted to accentuate how much of a weenie I was as a kid. Like, I really wanted to drive home how terrified I was of horror movies, because this is not a horror movie. This is, as you've just said, it's a lot of things. It is a musical comedy about killer fruits or vegetables, whatever your opinion here is. And I still couldn't watch it the first time I did because I was a little kid. And all I got to was the quote-unquote Jaws scene, I'll call it, when the tomatoes are floating in the water and eating people.
Yes.
And at that point, I literally made whoever's house I was at. I was sleeping over a friend's house. Like, the mom put it on or something like that. I was out. I literally was like, you got to turn the shit off. Like, obviously, at my young age, I wasn't saying that. But my general vibe was, we're not going to watch this because I'm not going to let you.
Do you remember how old you were when you saw it?
I hope I was very young. I
Okay.
do know I was very young at the time. I mean, this came out in 78, so I can't really like tie it to anything.
Right.
But I know I was young enough at the time to not really have a knowledge about cinema, not a knowledge about anything at that point. So in my little mind, all I saw was tomatoes eating people. Sorry, what I saw was tomatoes bobbing on the top of waves.
I was gonna say,
as
like,
people
let's
swam by them.
let's make this clear. The killer tomatoes are literally just giant tomato. Like, well, it depends on the scene. It could be an actual tomato, a giant paper mache tomato. But there's no, like, the poster has this like really intense illustration of a tomato with teeth. No, these tomatoes are just like tomatoes, and they make sounds like this.
It's so amazing. The moment that I first heard the sound, because the opening scene is, well, after the titles or the text sequence that explains that, you know, everyone laughed at the birds and then birds attacked the town, and now here comes the tomatoes, and the scene of the woman in their kitchen, and all you hear is this little coming out of the sink. I was like, I don't care if the rest of the movie
stuck in the drain and it like pops out like.
I was like, I don't care if the rest of the movie is terrible. I am in love with this movie from this beginning moment.
Well, and then if it goes into the title sides that are like, it's the song, and then it's like the 1-800 call, like, it just devolves into a madness immediately. And it's like, oh, this movie knows exactly what it is and what it's doing. And that's why it was so funny, Donato, to me, that this scared you. But as a kid, you probably just had like no fucking idea what was going on. You were like, this
Absolutely.
What it's like watching Airplane, like those kind of comedies you watch as a kid where you're just like, I don't understand why this is funny. But then you watch it as an adult and you're like, this is genius.
And yes, so again, I was very young at the time. I do want to stress this,
Yes.
but again, this is chosen to make a point. This is chosen to kind of give y'all a flavor of the things that were terrifying me at that age and how that evolved in me and how I got more scared of things from a certain
Did it-
time. So, but yeah, I didn't get past that water scene. That I literally made the mother turn it off, and I was like, no, absolutely not. I'm not watching this. This is horrifying.
So did it like affect you after you saw it, or did you just watch it, turn it off, and you're like, absolutely not? Like, were you scared of tomatoes afterward?
I love tomatoes. I will admit that. Well, maybe that's a bit of a vengeance thing that I
could
love tomatoes
be.
so much is that I kept eating them, and I was like, no, fuck you. This is how I get back at you.
So I do have a question, because it's a note I took while I was watching this film. Is this the start of the your obsession with Red?
Brilliant question. Brilliant question.
Terry!
So I will say I enjoyed the cartoon. Did either of you see the cartoon Attack of the Killer Tomatoes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That was a big like Saturday morning cartoon for me. I loved the cartoon, which is actually the scariest version of the tomatoes themselves, because they actually do have teeth and they actually do have like menacing growls.
Okay, so for Mary Beth, I want to explain this cartoon, because this is my only, until we watch this movie, I watch this movie for this podcast, my only entry point for this franchise. And Mary Beth, it takes place 5 years after the Great Tomato War, where tomatoes are banned. An evil doctor named Putrid T. Gangrene was working on experiments on tomatoes, and he is battled by a young 10-year-old named Chad Finletter and his friends FT, which is a fuzzy tomato that is pretending to be a dog, and a girl named Tara, who is secretly a human tomato hybrid pretending to be a teenage girl. Welcome to 80s and 90s cartoons for kids. They were wild.
We're going to give you a minute to let that sink in, and then you can speak.
I'm looking for images of this. Wait. What?
It's a very Toxic Avenger cartoon vibe.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that helps.
Wow. Incredible. So, okay, so, wow. Oh, no, then I found porn. I don't want to look at the Attack of the...
Okay.
All roads lead
Attack
to
of the Killer
porn.
what?
Attack of the Killer Tomato, like, oh, God, the internet.
The internet.
You can find
is
anything.
for
You can find
porn.
it's immediately like with the tomato human hybrid. Why? I just did a Google image search of the animated series.
Was that even on page 2? Was that on page 1?
page 1?
Do better, internet. Do better.
No more! Stop! God!
Okay, you're the one looking at this point. You kept going.
I
so
did. I know. I did this to me, but why? It's the first page for an animated. Whatever. Anyway, continue. Sorry, guys. Derailed.
So you watched that as well?
I did.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was a cartoon, and maybe that was part of it too. Like I was a cartoon fan, so I let the movie happen, and it being real life just threw everything for me. I don't. So that was one of the things I avoided afterwards. So I would say my after effects of being terrified of that scene and having it being turned off. Just done with it. Like, done with, we're never gonna let this live in my life. We're never gonna let this come on again. So it was active avoidance. That was my reaction to things that scared me at that point. It wasn't, let's test it and see how I react. It was, nope, you are dead to me. I am now, like, blacklisting you. You are gone.
So, how old were you when you revisited it?
Literally maybe 2 or 3 years ago for a Bloody Disgusting article.
Incredible. And you were probably
And
like...
I wasn't scared of it the whole time.
Yeah. I can only imagine watching this and being like, oh, this is the movie that has defined my childhood fear. Not defined,
This
but
is
like...
the thing that scared me so deeply that I ran away from the television. The thing that goes...
And it's like roll.
I mean, okay, to be honest, of all the scenes in the movie, because whenever someone chooses the movie, I'm always sitting there as I'm watching it going, okay, what is the scene that did it? And that scene, it's not scary. I mean, I don't want to say that it is scary, but in terms of like the rest of the scenes in the movie, it is the one moment of like actual horror in the movie, in my opinion. Silly, but there's actual horror there.
The one single one. Unless you are horrified of musical interludes, because some of those can be quite horrifying.
Which, okay, Puberty Love.
Puberty Love.
Puberty Love. What a horrible but fantastic song. Performed, by the way, by a young Matt Cameron, who would later go on to be the drummer for Soundgarden and Pearl Jam.
We all start somewhere.
You all start somewhere. And he started as a teen singing Puberty Love, so...
That has huge Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie vibes to me.
Oh,
I don't know if either of you seen that.
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
that kind of comedy and that kind of really bad song is just Master Shake just doing his song in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it is so many weird tie-ins where you can watch Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and you already alluded to the fact that it is a satire slapstick comedy. It's very in the vein of Airplanes, Hot Shots, all that. It's also the Shin Godzilla of food horror movies, because it is so
I need you to tell me everything about what you just said. I want to hear everything about why you called this the Shin Godzilla of food horror.
Because Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is completely about governmental failure. It's completely about the incompetence of officials and higher-ups, how they ruin everything. I mean, the villain of the film ends up being someone trying to, work for the government, and then he turns out to be like working for Big Tomato. Like, just all this shit. Like, none of it makes sense. But very much every scene is about the incompetence of these people, whether that be the tiny boardroom they all have to like crawl into, like the recurring gag of them in a janitor's closet and that being their conference room, and all these other dumb things.
Climbing on top of each other to get in.
That entire sequence where that is such a, there are moments of pure like comedic genius in this movie. There really are. And it's the whole scene where they're like, we got a group of generals that no one knows anything of. And so then we meet the generals, and the one general is talking about, he's like, oh, where'd you get that badge, sir? Or that medal? And he's like, oh, that was a 3-legged sack race badge. You know, it's like that's the...
That car agrees with you.
It does. That's like, I lost my train of thought is what just happened there.
Comedy, genuine comedy though.
Genuine
This is
comedy.
a very silly movie, but that is genuinely funny. Like there are flourishes here of a very intelligently written comedy.
Exactly.
And when I say flourishes, they're flourishes, but
Well, exactly, because like watching this, you know, it's like obviously they knew what they were doing with these jokes. Like they're very purposefully structured jokes. It's not just like, oh, this is so bad, it's funny. It's like, no, these people like actually had an idea about what comedy was and like how to structure those things and what really will make people laugh. What comedy was back then was extremely offensive, because boy, oh boy, this movie has aged like milk in some regards in terms of its use of words and racial imagery.
Yeah, the moment
not great.
No, the moment where the Japanese scientist is being like, first he is being ADR'd by someone that is obviously not his race that is like speaking, and then he knocks over the battleship, which is a callback to
Pearl Harbor.
And then they use a slur, and then they also call the fruits fags.
Yeah, I was like, that happened, and I had to pause. I was like, wait.
Yep.
Was
At
that
first
really
I didn't understand the joke, and then I was like, oh, fruits. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, that's really what we're doing, huh?
It's a little awkward in
78.
spots.
We're 78, so
Yes.
not a great time for that kind of stuff at all.
And it's like, you know, especially with the joke where he knocks the USS Arizona into the aquarium, that someone constructed that very purposefully. Like, and that's what's even wilder. It's like, oh, this is like a multi-part joke involving props and like everything. So it's like they knew exactly what they were doing. 1978.
Oh, this is
coach.
meticulously plotted for as silly as it is. Meticulously plotted, and it goes down to the Hitler costume. It goes down to the the woman journalist and her being told repeatedly to basically show more effort, being a running gag. Like, that's a funny thing. Like, that's how she gets ahead. It's very, very outdated.
Yeah. But I am curious about this, because, okay, I found an article that was on Bon Appetit, which surprised the hell out of me. But there is like an article that is basically a conversation with the people involved with this movie, kind of like an oral history of the film. They were talking about this was post-Vietnam, first of all, and there was an emergence of satire, a very light level, layered with, quote, what if you did a Japanese horror film that was a comedy musical that was really at its core sort of commenting upon the difficulty of the modern bureaucracy has of dealing with big problems and disasters, which is summarized with you saying that this is the Shin Godzilla kind of movie. But I was really taken aback when I saw that their idea was a Japanese horror film, until Mary Beth, before we were recording, mentioned that this kind of reminded her, of kaiju films?
Yeah, so this movie, so you mentioned Shin Godzilla, and I'm glad you did, because I also got a lot of vibes from like like the post-Godzilla kaiju movies that, like, so 1954 was when Godzilla was released, and that movie I think is a horror movie. It's pretty scary. It's actually really terrifying, like the original Godzilla, but then the kaiju movies that kind of came after it and the movement that came after that got increasingly more goofy. But staple of those movies is always like government incompetency and kind of just like mocking the government's inability to handle any kind of disaster, no matter like and what that looks like. And a lot of this comedy, I think, is based off of like actual serious events you see happen in those kaiju movies, like espionage and spy. Like there's in I think in one of the Mothra movies, like there's espionage that they're like trying to like steal these little women that are Mothra's attendants back from spies and all of this stuff. So it really is playing off of the structure of like the kind of classic kaiju movie and what they're saying, not just about like, oh, it's a cool monster movie, but about an ability to take care of disasters and like the ridiculousness of bureaucracy in Japan, which really does get lost, I think, in people thinking that kaiju movies are ridiculous. And they are. I will say they are ridiculous. And like Shin Godzilla, I think, did such a good job in being scary and putting that to the forefront rather than just silly. But yeah, it's got a lot of those. It's definitely, and when you said that, I was like, that's exactly what they were doing with this movie, was making a kaiju movie, but American.
Yeah, and I mean, the kaiju ties are there even deeper because you have the sequence where the miniatures are used instead of actual towns being destroyed. And you can look at that as a budgetary thing. Of course, they don't have, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes does not have the budget to pull off a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson level budget kind of movie. So they're going to have to use miniatures to destroy a city. But it's very obvious, and they want you to know they're doing it, and I think that ties right into the kaiju nature of it. And for however bad that overdub of the Japanese scientist is, that is also a callback to the bad overdub of those kind of movies. So it's ingrained throughout the DNA of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You just have trouble thinking about it because the tomatoes are not the size of kaijus. The tomatoes are just smaller monsters, and we never have that great pan out moment that even Crank 2 High Voltage does.
Not seen Crank 2.
Crank 2?
Wait, there's a kaiju moment in there. There's a kaiju moment in Crank 2.
No
What?
shit.
Is it really?
I've never seen Crank 2.
I've never
I
seen
was
Crank
dying
2.
at that. I was like, that's a ridiculous reference.
Straight up, Jason Statham turns into a kaiju and fights the other guy as a kaiju in a miniature town.
All right, well, that's going to the top of
I'm adding this to my list right now.
And there we go.
Y'all gonna tell me you saw the first Crank and you didn't get the second one?
I didn't even
I'm
see
not
the
even
first
sure
Crank.
if I saw the first one. Now that I think about it, I might have.
I think
I'm
I
not
kind of
sure.
got the gist. But honestly,
I get it.
but sometimes you really just want to watch a ridiculous action movie where Jason Statham is just like fucking shit up for an hour and a half. But yeah,
What
were you going to say, Terry?
I just going back to the bureaucracy. My favorite moments in this movie are the kind of like constant shots of going back to the like government that is failing everybody, where like the president is holding it. Well, his press secretary is holding a press conference about how the government is absolutely not spending money on fluffy flower print toilet paper. Like, this is what we're having a press conference for when there are mutant tomatoes marauding across the country. So that scene, or like when he decides he wants to nuke New York, even though the tomatoes are nowhere near New York at this point. And he's like, "You worry about your problems, I got mine," is the president's response. I'm like, this is hilarious. Or the Senate, the constant shots of the Senate where they're just like slowly falling asleep through the entire movie and not doing anything. And then at the very end, they're just like smacking their gavel, just like inefficiently. These moments I think are like, they are really hitting something that is really kind of smart and funny here.
Well, and I think this also calls back to kaiju movies because you don't have a lot of the tomatoes. You know what I mean? Like in a lot of these kaiju movies, you don't have a lot of the monster. It's a lot about the human interaction, the human characters. And in this, again, you don't really get a lot of tomatoes. It's a lot of human intrigue and like relate and like kind of that whole bureaucracy thing, which again is very clever and calls back to that, but also makes I thought it made the moments of the tomatoes even funnier because it's not even like for budgetary reasons because they don't have a lot of costumes or like it's not a big set pieces. It's just tomatoes rolling down the street
and gibbering.
And not even rolling, they're being thrown off camera. Like, it is clearly they're being chucked by some PA whose job was just to throw fake tomatoes at the actors.
Oh my god, it's incredible. But like so my favorite line of this entire movie is when there's just the guy you hear him go, "Oh, look at you, funky little tomato." Just like
And he's the dirt bike guy. He's like wearing leather.
He's the dirt bike guy, and it's like little tomato. It's like, but like they're small looking tomatoes. They look like little tomatoes, and then he's like, "Oh, you funky little tomato," and then you hear him get eaten, and it's just.
Yum, yum, yum.
It's just like, and like, I think they also play with scale in a funny way where I feel like you have different sized tomatoes, but like when the small tomatoes eat people, it's fucking hysterical. They obviously get bigger and bigger, but it's just something just about the size of a tomato and the thought of people running away from them scared and being eaten by them is just my favorite thing. Just like a little tomato rolling by and it's just incredible. It's incredible.
Well, that's the one scene with the military and the scientist, and they capture one of the tomatoes and they have it restrained. And Mason Dixon comes over and they're explaining to Mason Dixon why he should be horrified. And Mason Dixon's like, well, it's just like a regular sized tomato. What's the big deal here? And they're like, it's a cherry tomato. Like the delivery of that line is just perfect. And also my favorite moment, and this gets into the really slapstick nature of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, is there's the boy and his dog, and the boy is fishing by the river, and the dog runs away, and the boy is like, oh, what are you going to do? You going to check that out? And then you hear the dog's voice from off camera be like, I don't know, Billy, I'm going to go check that out. Like, the dog just starts talking, and you're like, what the fuck is happening?
Oh my god. Like, everyone on the team, when they line them up and they're like, one of the guys, like, they're in the scuba suit and he goes swimming in the fountain. It's just so stupid.
And the people sitting there are so scared. Like, they jump and they're like, what?
I love that their crack team, is a disguise expert, a swim expert, an underwater diver expert, and then a parachute expert.
Just the military guy. Just generic military paratrooper.
But I just love that for the swim and the underwater diving expert, they just drop him off in the desert. And they just like, I'm like, this is as far away as you can go from requiring skills with swimming or underwater diving. I love it.
It's nonsense. It is pure nonsense. And again, that goes to the character who is the military guy who is dressed as a paratrooper. And the gag for him is that he's always dragging a parachute everywhere. And he's always just in his military garb. So I think that's where the humor gets a little touch and go. It is funny at first. It's funny as he's running through the street and trying to camp on a sidewalk and doesn't know what a hotel is. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, he's just going to have that parachute everywhere. Oh, okay, so this is just going to be a thing now.
I will say that I did love his chase when he was chasing after the assassin. And they're just like crawling over like the pallets of things instead of like going around it. And he's like, trying to pull up his parachute and fold it up. And I loved it. It was like one of my favorite moments of like slapstick comedy in this film. Although, interestingly enough, when that scene at the very end, when he was being dragged down the street, he almost like died while filming this in a practice because like they took a corner and he went flying underneath a truck and hit his head. And they thought that he had died at that point. And he was so upset that they didn't catch it on film.
Did you read the fun fact about the helicopter crash?
I sure did. Okay. That $60,000 helicopter that just...
That's the helicopter in that scene where it's like kind of like flipping around in the background. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? Did I miss part of the movie? Like, what is happening?
No, that was a accident. I almost said happy accident. Like, no, literally that was their rental chopper. And it was, I think it was something like the tail blade. I have it right here. The tail rotor blades accidentally hit the ground, causing the helicopter to spin out of control. Debris in the top rotator blades narrowly missed the police officers in the scene and the crew off camera. The pilot received minor injuries, and the actors literally got pulled from the wreck and immediately started improvising so they could use the footage. And that's actually them crawling away from the crashed helicopter. And as Terry said, $60K right there, which was more than the entire, like, anything else in the movie cost. That was the most expensive thing that ever happened on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
In this Bon Appetit article, John DeBello, the co-writer and director, said that he ran in and pulled the guys out of the helicopter and, quote, would have been really embarrassed if I had to tell their agents they were dead, was what he said about the film.
Right.
What a big oopsie. Sorry, guys. You lost 2 clients.
Oopsie. Sorry. What an incredible movie.
And also, you talked about, you brought up Airplane. And what's interesting is that, so Airplane came out a few months after their movie, and in this, again, this Bon Appetit article, which is like a wealth of it, we'll include it in the show notes because it is, if you like this movie, it is quite a read. But he talks about how they saw that movie, and he's like, well, that's our movie with a budget.
Oh my God. But it is though, like it is though, because like their sense of humor is so similar. Like especially the moment that really got me with the Airplane similarity was when the woman reporter and the parachute guy were sitting next to each other on the phone. And they were talking about each other, and it was all the really fast, like intercutting and like funny, like gags and the jokes that were going on with like the editing. And I was like, "Yep, this is very much feels like in the vein of Airplane." But I guess this came first, which is amazing that this came. First.
There's also the Airplane starting with the voiceover, and you get like the intercom voice doing the gag about like what's parked out front, and that's the same gag that Attack of the Killer Tomatoes does, where it's like whoever has the tank in the parking lot, your lights are on, like one of those, like, but like that is almost the same gag, like note for note. Yep. So the fact that they did call it, Airplane is Attack of the Killer Tomatoes on a budget, It's a lot more, I give that sentence more credit than I think a lot of other people would.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure.
There also are a couple like really great lines in this movie, like ones that I had to like write down and go, how did you even think about this? Like when the president is talking about how this conflict is like trying to stack Bibles on whipped cream. I was like, what? What a random. I mean, it makes sense. Bible's heavy, whipped cream light. I get it, but it's like, what triggered in your mind to think that that is like the comparison you want to use in this movie? It's so random and funny at the same time.
That's as he's signing documents that just say president's signature here, and he grabs a new pen and signs it and throws it away because presidents just waste shit.
And like passing the pens. Oh my god, the pens. But like you were saying, that every part about this movie is like so purposefully funny though, because like even the background intercom on like on the military base, or even like the news reporting, or like, and the tomatoes are running around raping women, and I was like, what? I mean,
I wrote that line down specifically because the whole line is they're burning, pillaging, and raping. Because you're like, are they gonna say it? And then they do, and it's like,
and
the implication that tomatoes do that.
Right? And I was like, that is such a it's such a quiet, like almost throwaway line, but it's so it's funny. Like I have to, it's kind of hysterical. It's that with tomatoes, and it's just makes your mind work in so many horrific ways that you never thought that you would think about a tomato.
I spit on your grave, but with tomatoes.
I spit tomato seeds on your grave.
It's a dark moment, so I had to continue
I'm
staying
glad
dark.
that you also wrote that down. So I was like, look, I have to bring this up because it's so dark and fucked up, but also like dumb funny. That's so
because it's over the miniatures. It's over the miniature tomatoes destroying miniature buildings that are exploding and on fire.
Like, and that's this movie. I feel like has so many extreme jokes, and a lot of them don't land, especially now, like in regards to race. But there are some that I'm like, okay, like that is kind of like. And one of those extreme jokes that you're like, I have to laugh. Like, 'cause it's just so it's so ridiculous and over the top that you're like, yep.
Another one of my favorite moments along that same line is, and it's actually kind of a smart thing about like news reporting, but the moment when the news reporter's talking to the woman and he's like, Mrs. Williams, I understand your husband is missing. Do you think he's dead? And she starts like bawling. He's like, will you miss him? Will you marry again? What if he's laying in a ditch somewhere with both of his legs broken, calling your name? And it's just like the escalation of traumatizing this woman over her missing husband is just like,
God,
it's so perfect.
Oh, guys. Oh, my God. Thanks for letting me watch this movie. It's so dumb, but it's so like it's just so much. I think it's so much more clever than like you think about. Like when you hear about this movie, you're like, oh, that movie is going to be like so stupid. And like it is. But I don't think people talk about how like clever the jokes are for the most part. And it's incredible. It's incredible.
The other thing that I love going along with this incredibleness, though, is that when they go to the, I guess, ad person that's like trying to wrap up, like the kind of tell the story about it. And he's comparing tomato plants versus nuclear plants and about how tomato plants emit no radioactive waste and they cost less to build. They taste better. They cannot explode. Like, and he bursts into song and he starts singing, if you're sad and blue, tomatoes end it all for you. Like, I just... It's so good.
And it's the funny part because it's the repulsiveness of how marketers and media can spin anything and like turn the whole idea is that the press secretary is going to this Mind Hive or something. It's Mind something. Mind Maker. So the Mind Maker agency is going to spin away this giant tomato threat and we're going to tell the public that everything's fine. So you have this sleazebag breaking out into song, singing about how it doesn't matter what product they're selling. It's just about how it's sold. And that's all that matters to anyone.
It's about that rapper.
Right, it's just about the rapper. And you're sitting there going, this is ridiculous. This is funny. But at the same time, there is so much behind that single song and sentence and like that chorus that you don't really appreciate until it's over because in the moment you're just caught up with the ridiculousness. After the moment, you're like, oh, that's really dark. That's actually really terrible. And the government is going to use them. And that's what they do because they just media away their problems.
And the line that like I wrote down and I bolded with that is when he's talking about how we need to convince that housewife that that tomato that ate their pet is not dangerous. And that is what we have to do. And we have to sell and convince people that disaster is actually a blessing in disguise. And it's like, ooh, you are like really hitting on some themes here in amongst your very racist and silly humor in times.
And it boils down to, you brought the scene already, but the press secretary scene where he's answering questions about the toilet paper. But the funny part is those are the questions being asked of him by the journalist. So everyone's missing the point. Mm-hmm. And then just as the meeting's about to end, an 11-year-old in the back stands up from like a middle school, and he calls on him. And he's the only one that's like, what are you going to do about the impending killer tomato plague? And that's when like his face goes like, oh no, they caught me. Like no one mentions it until the little kid who is just like, hi, euthanation. Yeah, exactly. Like, this is just a child, but he's like, I'm paying attention. What the fuck, guys?
Loved it.
Wow.
Is it genuine love though? Like legitimately, is it genuine love, or was it just ridiculousness love?
I've watched this movie twice because we watched it. I watched it a few weeks ago when we were going to originally record, and then I watched it again because it'd been, a couple of weeks, and I genuinely love this movie. As much as like there are issues with it, and there are issues with this movie, I don't know. There's something about it that just that kind of go for broke mentality of like, we're just going to take $100,000 and just try to shoot this movie as much as we possibly can. And I love that sort of independent spirit of just like, we have this idea and we're going to just run with it and just keep going past the
I believe you mean roll with it.
Oh, there we go.
Try to catch up, Terry.
There we go.
Oh my God, when the guy in the fucking tomato outfit asks them to pass the ketchup. When he's like trying
that's how he gets outed. He's just a man in a tomato costume.
This man is trying to is in a tomato costume, disguising himself amongst the tomatoes, and he outs himself by asking someone to pass the ketchup when they're eating a person. God, this movie's incredible.
This is the kind of highbrow material you can expect from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Pass the ketchup.
Have you seen any of the others in the franchise?
I have not ventured into the other depths of the franchise.
I have heard Return of the Killer Tomato is actually really good.
Huh.
I have heard that. I bought the movie based on, I think I was talking with Michael Verratti, and I believe he said that movie is actually quite entertaining. And so I remember buying it. I haven't watched it, and I'm planning on watching it now.
I have a reason.
This. I do.
So do we want to wrap up and give this a rating out of 5?
That sounds fantastic.
Terry, how many funky little tomatoes out of 5 do you give Attack of the Killer Tomatoes?
Okay, so watching this movie in 2021, I was thinking about how poorly a lot of parodies age. And I was thinking in particular, like, I feel like me watching this movie now would be like someone in, and I did the math, 2043 watching Scary Movie and being confused about some of the references. Because there are some references in here where it's like no one that is not born before a certain age is going to get any of it. And I don't think it's aged particularly well in some cases, but at the same time, there is a silliness here that belies some of the intelligence that I think is going on behind the screen. And I also started thinking about how I'm pretty sure Mars Attacks ripped off this movie with the way that they repel the aliens at the end with the horrible song. Because that is basically how they destroy the aliens in that movie, is with a terrible song that ends up getting played across the world to repel them. So I think that there are a lot of things in here that probably have lingered in pop culture. I don't know. It was a lot of fun. I think if I had to think critically about it, I'd probably give it 3 funky little tomatoes out of 5. But I did really enjoy it in the moment more than a 3 little tomato reference. But what about you, Mary Beth?
So like, I want to be like 5 stars, 5 little funky tomatoes, like the best, so fun. But then it's like, ooh, but you can, and it's that conversation of you can still love things that have offensive material, but you still got to acknowledge them and you still got to talk about it, and you just got to know it's there, and you can still think it's fun and also realize that parts of it are not good. Like, why is there a black guy in a Hitler costume? And it never is brought up again. So Jesus Christ, like, comedy is truly watching this movie was truly just a really big mind fuck about how far comedy is, or how comedy has evolved in the past 50 years. Anyway, that aside, I had a very good time with this really stupid movie about tomatoes and bureaucracy, and it reminded me of Airplane in a very lovely way. So I will definitely be giving this a 3 funky little tomatoes out of 5. Donato, give the final word.
Absolutely. Terry, that was a great point, bringing up, Scary Movie and how that would age 30-ish years from now if we were watching it then, because the comparison I'm going to make is Scary Movie and that franchise, especially the sequels, they're going to play so poorly because their type of satire is just based on pop culture. They don't know how to make fun of anything baser than, this is a funny thing you saw in the news, we're going to cram it into a movie and hope that it's still relevant. That to me is like a base kind of satire, where Scary Movie 1 and 2 do it a lot better, and 2 on a rewatch does some things not great either, so that falls right in the category of holy crap, what is going on. But those latter sequels, they're useless because all they are is like Dr. Phil jokes and Shaq cameos. And sure, that's funny to us in the moment, and maybe Shaq will sustain, but there's nothing there of value. Where Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is a satire. It is definitely slapstick, and it is more along the lines of Airplane, where they are making fun of something that we can recognize, whether that's kaiju movies, whether that's the government, whether that's something tangible that's not just related on a like what would now be a one-hit headline used in like base journalism. So Attack of the Killer Tomatoes does do that right. It does it well. And I am sticking with the 3 out of 5 though, for all the reasons you both said. It exists. I watch it. I kind of chuckle. I go, how the hell did this get made? We find out how it got made and that it almost killed people. And we still just sit here going, holy fuck, this exists.
And for that, I am thankful. This exists, and 3 other films in the franchise? I think there's a total of 4 films. But yeah, wow. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us to talk about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Oh, I'm sorry. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have that you'd like to share or plug?
I can say that the listeners can find me at Donatobon on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram. You will get all of my writing posted in all of those places, so I will try not to give an avalanche of all my writing, because I do a lot of it, as they said, and it's everywhere. It's hard to keep track of, so you can also find me on Authory, if you know what that is. It's a nice little page that puts everything together, and it keeps it in one place, so no matter where I write, it shows up there, at Matt Donato. Things that are coming up for me, just more of the same. All my horror reviews on what to watch. Fantasia's happening right now. I don't know when this is going to go up, but Fantasia goes for 3 weeks, so I'll finally start watching some of those movies. Fantastic is on the horizon. We got a lot coming up, so yeah, look me, find me, see my dumb tweets about Demon Wind. We'll have a good time.
And Reds.
Lots of Reds.
And where can they find Certified Forgotten?
Certified Forgotten, you can find us at Certified Forgot, or you can find our Patreon. Search Certified Forgotten, because every dollar that goes to our Patreon goes back into the website and our writers. That is our promise, and that is what we will continue to do. So however much we can get from the Patreon, that is how many articles we can put out, and that is how much we can pay our writers. So you help us, we help them. It's all a big circle of trust there.
Yeah. So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.